What's up guys, welcome back to a new video. Today I'm going to be going over things that you should look at when you're going to buy a Jeep XJ. Typical spots you'll find rust and rot, aftermarket parts that have been added that add value. Basically I'm going to be going over everything that you guys got to look for before you go and actually pull the trigger. This is my 2000 Jeep Cherokee Sport. I picked this up back in 2018 for about $3,000. It had a lift kit on it, much smaller tires, didn't have the bumper, the roof rack, the light bar. None of that fancy stuff. Since then, I have done the heater core, did the slip yoke eliminator kit with the drive shaft as well. The entire front end basically was rebuilt, just factory OEM parts. Now, when I bought this Jeep, honestly, I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know exactly the key areas where to look. So I'm gonna make a video to show you guys. So hopefully you don't make the same mistakes I did when I went and bought a Jeep. And it's not really mistakes, it's all learning experience too. I'm not upset at myself. You know, I bought a really nice Jeep and it's got some flaws, that's all. So I've owned this about 3 years now. And like I said, the center caps right here, I'll pop up a picture. That's what they look like. I never took those off, which was a big mistake. A lot of people are gonna jump down in the comments and say, oh, this is an issue because you didn't wash your vehicle. That's not true. I wash this every day. If you know me, I'm super meticulous about how clean I keep my Jeeps. So getting back to this, the reason why it looks like this right now, it's completely hacked. I know, I did the best I can while I was at work. Well, I was washing it and I said, okay, let me take these caps off and see how bad this really is. This is the other side. It's not as bad, obviously, because it's still intact. You can tell somebody, the previous owner, whoever welded in a patch right here, probably started rotting a little down here and they cut it out and welded a piece in, which is fine, but what they should have done is remove this bracket, which holds that plastic piece on I was talking about. Once you remove this, you can cut along this second line right here and basically cut all that out around here and fold it under and fold the other side under so it seals the trunk area. So this side, again, isn't too bad. You know, I'm just gonna cut and fold basically and grind this down and see how much I can get off of there. But as for this side, I think I'll just get a new replacement panel because it's gone up pretty high. Again, I'm gonna try my best and sand that down or grind it down and see how much metal's actually behind there. And also right here, it started to rot away in the inner wheel well. Isn't a huge deal, but what happens there is that you can probably tell it's wet right here. That's directly behind this. It's a hole and it goes right into my wheel well, which is not good. Not good for a lot of reasons. There's electrical that runs up in there too, which can short some things out. So that would be the first thing to look for when you're going to buy an XJ. Does it have the plastic piece over it? Is it already cut and folded? That's a big selling point. Bonus points if it's cut and folded already. If it still has those plastic caps over them, climb behind and take a peek and see how bad it is. In my case, as you can tell, it's pretty bad. But unfortunately for me, I learned a little later about the cut and fold. Yeah, it was on me. I should have definitely taken those plastic pieces off a lot sooner and I wouldn't have dealt with that issue. And what's actually crazy about this rot here is you would look at that and say, oh, this thing is completely clapped. You should go scrap it. I've had multiple people tell me just to go get another body. Well, I'm not gonna do that because the unibody is actually really nice. There's no rot anywhere on the unibody except one little spot on the other side that I'll show you. But the rockers have been replaced not the right way. They were basically filled with Bondo where there were rot spots in there, so I'm going to address that in the future. The floor pans are not the best, but they're pretty nice considering the condition of the quarter panels here. So I'm not making this video with intent to scare you guys away from buying a Jeep that has a little bit of rust, because if you're in the Northeast, let's face it, you're probably not going to find a 100% rust-free Jeep or any vehicle in that matter. Don't be afraid of some rust. You just got to get under there. My suggestion, bring some cardboard, bring a crawler if you got to. Really get under there and look at every little crevice. Had I addressed this 2-3 years ago when I first bought the Jeep and ripped those caps off and seen what was under there, I definitely could have saved this. So I'm making this video so you guys don't make the same mistakes I did, and hopefully you can go get yourself an XJ and, you know, get a good price for it too. Because although rust sucks, you can remove it. Anything can be fixed. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It's just how much you're willing to put into it and how much money you're willing to spend. And sometimes rust and a little imperfection can be a good thing because you can talk the price down and you know, it's a bargaining point. I prefer to buy a vehicle, you know, not rotted, but I don't personally have the tools or space to go fixing all that. I always end up just paying somebody, and yeah, it's a lot of money. So if you got the tools and space, rust ain't an issue. It really isn't. What you want to look for though is the unibody. If you guys don't know, the XJ does not have a frame, so lifting the body off of a frame is out of the option. It's on a unibody, so that kind of makes things difficult because you have to end up just patching and putting frame stiffeners on, well, unibody stiffeners. And I'll show you about that probably in next 2 videos, because the 2JZ is getting the frame stiffeners, but I have to address the crack that's in the unibody as well. So that's going to get patched, and then the unibody stiffeners are going over that, because obviously you can't just throw stiffeners over rust. It needs to weld onto clean metal. So talking about the unibody, this bad boy is pretty solid. You can still see the factory paint and undercoating on there that it has. Like I said, it's not in the best condition. I do have some surface rust and little holes starting to form here, but that's not an issue. These floor pans are cheap and they're easy to be replaced. The unibody is structural, so that's the important part. When you go and buy an XJ, you really want to get under here and look at every single little one of these drain holes and make sure there's no cracks. And overall, just make sure that the rust isn't super extensive. In my case, this isn't bad. When I picked the Jeep up, again, another mistake that I made that I encourage you guys to do if you're going to go buy an XJ is get the thing undercoated. I didn't do that for whatever reason. I was learning all about these Jeeps and I didn't really know much about them. Did very little research before going to get one, and I should have watched a video like this. So if you guys don't have a lot of rot, just a little bit of rust, you can actually grind that down and get these things undercoated, and you probably won't have an issue. Whatever reason, this Jeep, that never was done. So that's my fault. I'll take responsibility on that. Although I did wash this thing like crazy over the summer and in the winter too. I wash this about 3 times a week in the winter, probably twice a week in the summer. But yeah, so moving on. All right, so you go and find an XJ you want to go look at, and the body looks clean. The quarter panels have already been cut and folded. There's no rot or whatever. So the next thing you guys want to look for are the rockers. And this can be tricky as well, because sometimes the rockers can look good, but in my case, they've been improperly patched. I did that just to get through a season and to get an inspection sticker, but you can tell there's some little rust forming over here. That's where the Bondos, you can tell right there, that's starting to crack already. So give your rockers a good knock when you go and check them out. Really get under there and check the gaps, make sure everything's good. Again, we're not looking for super perfection unless you're willing to spend like $10,000 on an XJ, which most people aren't. Their price range is usually between $3,000 to $5,000. So if you find an XJ that has some rust and some imperfections, you can always talk the price down and get yourself a good deal and fix it after you buy it, obviously. So moving on from rust and rot and body imperfections, there's a lot of things that can catch your eye when you're going to buy or you're going to look at a Jeep. You got these fancy parts, the bumper, the roof rack, the light bar, the flares. Might have some cool looking wheels on it. Well, that's cool and all, and those are negotiating points as well, but that doesn't really determine the price of the Jeep. All those things, in my opinion, are useless, and they're just add-ons that come with the Jeep that the owner was willing to give to the next owner instead of taking it all off and selling it as is. Because in my opinion, the Jeep is worth the same, even if I didn't have the bumper, the roof rack, and the light bar. Those are just accessories that anybody can buy and put on. They're really not that expensive. So don't get super attached to a Jeep and thinking it's all built up just because it has some bumpers and some flashy accessories on it. Because a lot of the times people will spend more money and time on the things that you visually can see versus the things that you can't see and that actually matter. One of those things is a slip yoke eliminator kit. And to some people, it's not that big of a deal, but I'll explain to you what that is. So anytime you lift a Jeep or any vehicle for that matter, you're changing the geometry of it. So another thing people do with Jeeps is they add a slip yoke eliminator kit. That's your transfer case. That's the slip yoke eliminator. It doesn't really eliminate the slip yoke. It just moves it down to the axle versus at the transfer case. You also get a new drive shaft as well, which gives you a much better ride going down the road. You'll see a lot of the times instead of that, people will take their cross member, drop it, remove these bolts, and place in about an inch or half-inch spacers, these little metal pucks, and that goes in between the unibody and the cross member. That drops everything down. It psychs out the Jeep thinking it's at factory height, so you get a much better ride. But I'm going to tell you guys right now, that's just a Band-Aid, because over time, you're just going to go through U-joints like crazy. That's exactly what happened to me. I ran a transfer case drop for about 2 years until I got sick of replacing U-joints. So I just spent the $1,000, did the slip yoke eliminator kit. I paid someone to do it for me, so I paid a little more. It's something you guys can do at home. A lot of people have the tools and space to do it, so go for it if you guys have all that. Slip yoke eliminator kit isn't really, a make or break for a Jeep. Just like the rust and rot, anything can be added or fixed, but it's definitely a good bargaining point, just like anything else. So Jeep Cherokees came with 2 rear ends. This axle is a Chrysler 8 1/4. This is the better axle of the 2. The other axle was the Dana 35, which is nicknamed the Dana 35 because it's notoriously weak. It's visually smaller. If you look at this one right here, it's more round and it's got more of a flat bottom, whereas the Dana 35 is more ovular, looks smaller. The axle's actually, a lot smaller, a lot thinner, just looks tinier. You don't want to get one with a Dana 35 unless you have the intention of swapping out the Dana 35 with a Chrysler 8 1/4 or Ford 8.8. That's on you. Again, a good selling point, if you want a Jeep you're going to want to go and hop in and drive and not do much work to it, don't get the Dana 35. Do not get it. That's if you want to put big tires on it, it's just going to explode. Don't even bother. My opinion, that's a make or break. If it's got a Dana 35, I don't even really want the Jeep. Unless you guys want to swap it out and do all the work of axle swapping your Jeep. If it means that much to you. Let's say you buy a really clean one, you find a really clean Jeep, and it's got a Dana 35, then that's a different story. Swap out the axle, you got yourself a really clean Jeep, throw the axle away, problem solved. So we went over rust, rot, areas to look for, the unibody, slip yoke eliminator and drive shaft. Wheels and tires really aren't that big of a deal. I mean, you can always buy some, but I noticed that if you buy a Jeep, you always want to start fresh with brand new tires, because in my experience, if you buy used tires, a lot of your death wobble or poor ride quality comes from tires, because a lot of people don't properly rotate them. They don't keep them at the proper PSI. They do burnouts in them, which, yeah, I'm guilty of too, but I don't wonder why my Jeep rides like crap if I do some burnouts and not rotate them. Tires, wheels, not that big of a deal. You can always buy those after you buy the Jeep. And one super important thing, probably one of the most important things that I ask when going to buy a Jeep, a Cherokee specifically, is if the heater core has been replaced. Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when the heater core will go. These old HVAC units on these Jeeps, they just suck. So the heater core tends to clog up and will pop, causing your windshield to fog up. You smell antifreeze, and obviously you don't have heat, and you can't drive the vehicle unless you bypass the heater core, which is a cheap fix. But yeah, it's an expensive job unless, again, you're doing it yourself, which requires ripping the entire dash out. Some people claim they can do it in like 30 minutes, but typically it's like an all-day job if you've never done it before. I pay people to do it. It's just easier, sorry. So a heater core, definitely important. If you ask the owner if the heater core had been replaced and they go, probably keep that in the back of your mind. Again, a negotiating point when buying the Jeep, because you will have to replace that eventually. And it sucks when it goes on you because it leaves you basically stranded. When you buy a Jeep with the heater core actually done, even if you have paperwork with it too, that's even better, because you just feel safer knowing that that's already been done. Don't have to worry about that. That's why I like owning a Jeep and doing all those things over the years too, because eventually you will replace everything that's broken and you'll have yourself a semi-reliable vehicle. You guys need to remember too, these are 20-year-old vehicles, some 25. So you got to remember there's a lot of things that are going to go wrong with this, even after spending thousands and thousands of dollars. So keep that in mind. If you want a vehicle that you're going to hop in every day and not have any problems, the Jeep Cherokee probably isn't for you. But if you want a really badass, really fun, reliable winter rig, then yeah. I don't want to use the word reliable too much, because although it is reliable, this Jeep's brought me to work many times in snowstorms. It has let me down a few times. I'm not going to boast about this and say it's never let me down, because it has. And it's a Jeep, it's an old vehicle, and a lot of things break and a lot of things go wrong with it. But if you guys listen to these tips and tricks that I have in this video, it can save you a lot of time, money, and headaches. Another thing I like to do is pull the floor mat up, check for moisture. So if the carpet's nice and dry, cool. You know it doesn't leak, and chances are it's well taken care of. The heater core hasn't leaked out, the windshield doesn't leak. But if it's wet down there, you want to question yourself on why the floor is wet. Is it the windshield? This is notorious where the heater core leaks from when it starts to go out. So keep an eye on that. Interior wise, headliners always sag, like literally always. This one's been replaced, as you can tell. If you guys are familiar with the 2JZ XJ, my other Jeep, it had a saggy headliner. It's actually in the shop right now, which we're probably gonna go pick up in a little bit. But yeah, check out the headliner, make sure it's been done. If not, no worries, you can do it. It's an easy fix. And I sound repetitive here, but all these things are bargaining points. And how much you can steal the Jeep for, basically. At the end of the day, you want to pay the smallest amount and get the best deal. Because I think that's what all of us want, right? One thing you always do when you go buy any vehicle, regardless of what it is, you take it for a test drive. So I bought this Jeep with the intention of just driving it in the winter and having it basically just be a little winter beater. Turned out I fell in love with this Jeep, and I ended up sinking about, I don't even know at this point, 7,000, 8,000, probably more than that in parts and labor and upgrades. And I'm still dealing with issues because, again, it's an old 20-year-old Jeep. And one of those issues is oil pressure. Very important that when you go buy a Jeep, you keep an eye on that oil pressure. Not only when it's cold, but you really want to let the Jeep idle for about 10 to 15 minutes, go drive it around, get it nice and hot, come back, park it, and keep an eye on that oil pressure gauge because it's very important. That oil pressure maintains, I think the minimum is 13 PSI, but you really want more than that. In my case, it's like 10, 11, 12, because I think my sending unit is starting to go out or the screen is clogged. But yeah, you always want to keep an eye on that. Let it get hot. Definitely don't rely on it if it's cold and you see 40 PSI. All of them do that. It's going to have good PSI on cold start because it's cold, the oil's thick. All right, so you can tell here on startup, I was just driving this, it's not cold. My oil pressure, it's looking pretty good because I was sitting here for a while chatting. But usually my oil pressure on idle is about 13, sometimes even down to 10. And it's only March right now, it's like 50 degrees, which is a warm day. And yeah, towards the summer, it's probably only going to get worse. If it drops down too low, you'll get a little light that says check gauges. And yeah, that's telling you that your oil pressure is, yeah, something's going on with it. And you probably shouldn't drive it. Obviously, you can tell by listening to it. If you hear any type of knock, turn the thing off because you don't want to send a piston to Mars. Another thing you want to look at while you're letting the Jeep idle, after you go drive it around for a little bit and say you like the Jeep and everything's good, it drives good, oil pressure is good, let's say all that's fine, you want to keep an eye on the temperature gauge as well. It should always idle right below 210. You may have times though that it does, let's say on a hot day and your AC's running, it's going to go slightly over 210. The electric fans will kick on and drop it down to about 180. So you don't really want to see anything more than 215, 220. You're probably overheating a little bit or it's just some heat soak. But that just comes with age. In my case, this Jeep has 349,000, about to hit 350. And the engine has been replaced. But the engine itself probably has still close to 240,000 miles on it. So you got to expect things to go out. And you just got to spend the money to keep these things running. And I hope that helps you guys. I didn't make this video with intent to scare you away from rust and rot and things that need work. So definitely if you're out there checking out XJs, look for these things. They can save you a lot of time and money and an overall headache. So yeah, let's go pick up this headliner because I want to see how much it's going to cost. So yeah, I appreciate you guys for watching and good luck on your hunt.